Everybody. We are streaming live, not from Studio 4 today, but from an assortment of living rooms. But we're still brought to you under the auspices of Simon & Schuster Studio 4 and Book Club Favorites to talk about The Winemaker's Wife by Kristin Harmel. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
It's going to be an unusual experience today, but we are embracing staying at home and staying safe and helping to flatten the curve and all that good stuff. And a great book is a great way to do that. So we're really happy that you've joined us to talk about this great book. And I am joined by some wonderful people here in the other squares on this space. First of all, I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Kristin Harmel herself, the author of The Winemaker's Wife. So she's going to be here. She'll tell us what it all really means. And the rest of us will be like, oh, okay. And my colleague, Michelle, who is down in my lower left, we'll see. And we also have Hannah Schaefer, who is an instrumental, usually behind the scenes gal here at Book Club Favorites, but she runs that program. And today it is particularly going to be her job to shout out your comments and questions. So as always, we encourage you to participate. We're super excited about it. And to bribe you a little bit to participate, if you're feeling a bit shy, we have a great giveaway. Now, if you've been to some of these before, you might know that usually we give away copies of the author's book and copies of next month's, one of those. What is time? We don't know. Books, but because mailing physical things is a little challenging right now, we have something that I think is really super special as a prize this time. If you ask us a question or make a comment here on the live, you will be entered for a chance to win a Skype call or a phone call with Kristin herself. She has generously offered to chime in, give you a call. Maybe if you're talking about this with a book group of your own, she can call in and join that. But I think that's a great chance to talk to the author of a wonderful book. So that is something that we are giving away to one lucky commenter. All you have to do is ask a question, which you were probably going to do anyway. So what could be better? Okay. I think then we're going to jump right in. So I will once again start with just a little bit of introduction, and Kristin can be like, girl, let me tell you how to actually do this right. But let me summarize briefly The Winemaker's Wife for people who might be chiming in and haven't yet read yet. I'll remind my fellow participants, we stay fairly spoiler free because while some people have already read, a lot of them might be shopping for their next book club pick. So we're going to stay kind of thematic without trying not to give away some of the spoilers. The Winemaker's Wife is a wonderful book of World War II historical fiction, but it also has a contemporary plot line as well. And I feel like it centers primarily around three people in the Champagne vineyards of World War II. It was a region that I didn't realize how it was affected by the war. But there's kind of a complicated love triangle. There's the threat of the Nazis at the doorstep, as it were. And there are some buried secrets that lie deep beneath the Champagne chateau, the Maison Chauveau, she said, maybe butchering that. And those secrets lie hidden for many years, but have repercussions that actually reach far into the future, indeed, into the present day, where we meet another generation affected by the story. So our World War II characters, we have Inez and Michel, or Michael, because he's her husband. Michel is the owner of the Maison de Champagne. Inez is his young wife. And there is Theo and Céline. They're all in the World War II story. And then in the present day, we meet Liv Kent, who is a New Yorker who finds herself tied to this in interesting ways. Whew. All right. I maybe went too deep, but I really do love this book, and it's been so great to work on it with Kristin. But let's jump into actually talking about it a bit. Kristin, why don't you start us off with a little bit of what inspired you to tell this story?
Well, first of all, great introduction. Thank you, Abby. And you're hired to do all my French pronunciation from now on, because as you will see, I will butcher the French pronunciation in the book I actually wrote. So this is really shameful. But yeah, my French accent is terrible. Yours is great. But so I've been writing about World War II since my 2012 novel, The Sweetness of Forgetting, which was actually the first time you and I worked together, Abby.
Yeah.
We've been working together since, I think you acquired that book in 2011. So it's been a long road for you.
Almost a decade.
A long, beautiful road so far. So I have a really deep interest in World War II history. I lived in Paris for a little while in my early 20s. And it wasn't until after I had left Paris that I realized how much World War II history had taken place along the streets that I was walking every day while I lived there. I've tackled Paris a few times, and I began to think, particularly after my 2018 novel, The Room on Rue Amélie, which took place primarily in Paris and was about, in part, the French resistance, somebody working for the resistance. I began to think, I wonder how active the resistance was in some other regions of France I love. And one of those regions is Champagne, which is a place, I mean, I enjoy drinking champagne, but I had also gone there for my honeymoon in 2014. And I had been very inspired by it. But they talk very much about World War I when you're visiting Champagne. That's a real point of pride for them. They suffered a lot and survived a lot and were very resilient through the First World War. But you don't hear them talk a lot about World War II. So I wondered what happened there, how active the French resistance was. And as I began to dig into it, I realized that, in fact, the French resistance was very active there. And there were a lot of sort of untold stories that were begging to be told. And so, I mean, they had me at Champagne, really, though, because in order to research the book, I had to drink a lot of champagne. And I mean, my gosh, life is so hard. I had to drink all the champagne because how else would I accurately be able to describe it? So there's no excuse for why I continue to drink it as heavily, though. Sorry.
Michelle and I think, served as able research assistants, also drinking champagne on this end to help.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the great sacrifice, ladies. Yes, thank you.
One of the themes in your book, in a lot of your books, and in Winemaker's Wife in particular, has been coming to mind for me a lot lately, and that's the theme of resilience and how people in extraordinary circumstances can rise to the occasion. Are there any particular moments or elements of the story that theme was particularly important for, Kristin?
You know, throughout The Winemaker's Wife, and I won't spoil anything for anyone who hasn't read it yet, but some of the characters make really tremendous mistakes. I mean, they have character flaws that sort of lead them down the wrong roads, and then they lean fully into those character flaws and really screw up. I think that resilience really comes into play when we're the ones who screw up, you know, when it's something we've done wrong that we sort of have to fix. And so you not only have to sort of suck it up and say, like, all right, I screwed up there, I need to move forward. But then you need to move on from whatever it is that's been done. So I think in the book, those are sort of the moments of where the utmost resilience is called for. But it's interesting that you mentioned the importance of resilience in these times. You know, one of the questions I get asked most frequently when I'm on the road, meeting with book clubs, meeting at bookstores, you know, on a book tour, is why World War II? I mean, there are so many World War II novels out right now. People are writing about it so much. And I think one of the things is that we, as a society, we like reading about people in hard times, ordinary people in hard times who step up, right? And that's something that happens again and again and again in World War II stories. So I think that's what appeals to people about World War II, but I also think it's what makes it so important to be reading that type of book right now. So, you know, while we're all, you know, sheltering in place or whatever, you know, we're social distancing when we're home, it's nice to read a nice lighthearted book, but I also think there's something to be said for digging into a World War II novel that explores real people just like us, normal, ordinary, everyday people who are put in extraordinary circumstances where they have to sort of pull through and have that resilience and survive. So I think this is a good time to read about World War II, whether it's my book or somebody else's.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in real quick because I think I mean, it sounds, I mean, yes. And we're getting a lot of feedback that like resilience right now is exactly, you know, something that everybody has or needs. And we're also getting a couple questions. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in.
Yeah.
So Brittany wants to know one thing that surprised you while researching the book. And Lucille also wants to know how long it took to write.
So both great questions. Thank you very much. One of the things that really surprised me, and I mentioned this actually in the author's note, when I was in Champagne and reading about Champagne and all of this to research the book, a name that kept coming up was de Vogüé, Jean-Robert de Vogüé, I think, who was the head of Moet et Chandon. And it actually is said Moet, not Moet. I always thought it was Moet, but it's Moet et Chandon, which was one of the largest champagne houses at the time during World War II, and is still one of the largest, most prominent champagne houses. So the head of Moet et Chandon was also the head of the French resistance in that area of France, which I keep repeating that fact, and it's extraordinary because not only was he in charge of one of the largest champagne houses, but he was also in charge of the CIVC, which was the organization that dealt with the Germans, that basically negotiated with them about which champagne they would receive, how much champagne they would receive. So he was meeting on a very regular basis with Hitler's man in Champagne. And while he was doing that, he was working behind his back to undermine him, leading the French resistance, the political wing of the French resistance in that area. So I thought that was such a cool, surprising fact that I stumbled upon. And then the other question was, how long did it take me to write the book? As Abby will probably tell you with a great roll of her eyes, I send in ridiculously detailed outlines, like abnormal. Like I'm a big weirdo when it comes to my outlines. So I think most authors either don't outline at all or they outline in some sort of like, here are the bullet points of what I'm going to do. I just write for like 25,000 words, which is about a quarter of the length of a finished novel. And poor Abby has to, go through all of that and give me comments or whatever. So the outline is the most creative part of it for me. And that probably takes me 2 or 3 months to outline. And then I think it probably takes me another solid 6 months or so, 5 to 6 months to actually write the book. Once we've sort of worked out the plot points and, what's working in the outline and what's not working in the outline. But that doesn't include necessarily the research I do before I even start the outline, because I need to have a grasp of, the historical facts, and everything else that sort of framed it at the time. And also, particularly with this book, it took me a great deal of extra time to learn about the process of making champagne, which was something I tried to do from here, just reading books about champagne making, including a 1976 textbook that was written only in French that I had to pay to have translated, because it was the only thing I could find that told me how champagne would have been made in the 1940s. And then also going to Champagne toward the end of writing the book to talk to some winemakers in person. So it was a much longer research process for this one than I normally had for my books. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I think so. We have thank you too. So thanks.
Oh, good. You know what? I want to let Michelle talk for a second. And so I want to tip back to, we've talked about how a lot of Kristin's books and The Winemaker's Wife are about sort of ordinarily people or people in sort of relatable scenarios and stuff. But these characters I think are really interesting because they make some questionable choices sometimes and they make mistakes, like you mentioned. So Michelle, I'm going to ask you, did you have a favorite character or a character that you found the most relatable in this story, or one that you connected with most?
I feel like this might be a questionable choice, but it was Ines. I liked her a lot. I thought that, yes, she probably made a lot of questionable decisions. A lot of her choices that she made, I feel like, were out of emotion and her like response to something that happened. And she was kind of, I don't want to say like child, but she made these decisions, not fully looking at the big picture. It was kind of a little self-centered in this. And I kind of really liked her because it seemed like a normal person. I feel like I'd probably get mad if I found some, certain things out that she found out. It was kind of, hopefully I would have not made the same decisions, but she was very relatable in that she wasn't just someone she seemed like a real person to me, and I really liked that.
Yeah. I feel like even if you disagree with her, it was very much like, oh no, girl, no, don't.
Yeah.
Almost in the way that we all have friends or ourselves sometimes who've made bad man decisions, and they're like, you know, and you're like, you finally broke up with him, and then they're like, oh, we got back together, and you're like,
oh.
But you understand why, you know, and I think that's a hard needle to thread as an author. And Kristin, I don't know if you can chime in on how it was to create the character of Inez in that way, but because you don't want everybody to be perfect, but you still want them to be likable. Did you reckon with that while you were creating her?
Well, Abby, it's so funny that you asked that question because your voice was in my head the entire time I was writing the outline for this book. Because how many books have we done together? The Sweetness of Forgetting, Life Intended, When We Meet Again, Room on Room. Okay, 6 now, right? So 5 when I was doing Winemaker's Wife. The thing that kept ringing in my head again and again in your beautiful voice, Abby, was your characters have to be messy. Your characters have to be messy. Because every time I turn in a first draft to Abby, she sends it back to me with like, dust these characters up, like dirty them up. They're just too perfect. It's boring. They're boring characters. So this time I was like, Abby, I'm going to get you. No boring characters, not this time. So Inez was sort of a challenge to me. And it was a challenge that you, Abby, helped me grow into as a writer, because I think that was one of my, one of the things that was a weak spot for me in terms of creating characters. And you and I think always would manage to get it right by the final draft, but it was a lot of kicking and screaming on my part and a lot of like beating me down on your part. So, so with this book, I really sort of endeavored to do that with you in my head. And it was fun. I liked the idea of, particularly in the past, Inez and Celine being really imperfect. And at the beginning, I think you get the sense that Inez is imperfect, but Celine seems a little bit more virtuous. But I think also Celine knows she's virtuous, and that to her means that she can do no wrong. And so she excuses herself a lot of things. But I also liked the idea that a character who can maybe be selfish and immature at the beginning can also grow, because that's the way we are as people. I mean, and you also have to remember that these characters were young. They were in their early 20s. And, you know, I hope I'm 40 now, about to turn 41. And I hope that I've grown as a person since my early 20s. I did a lot of really stupid things then. I made decisions probably that hurt people. And there are people in my life who probably, if the story of me stopped, you know, 15 years ago, I might be an unlikable character. So I'd like to think of every character in life and in books as someone who can consistently evolve and atone for the things they've done wrong. And I hope that Inez grew for all of you over the course of the novel.
I want to just jump in real quick to say, and then we'll come back to Michelle, but I just want to remind anyone joining us a little late that we are coming to you from 4 different living rooms and with the help of Studio 4 at Simon & Schuster. This is Book Club Favorites, and we're talking about The Winemaker's Wife. Ladies with books, hold up those books.
Yeah,
And
we have right here.
The Winemaker's Wife.
At home in our living rooms.
live from various living rooms.
Yeah.
We're here talking with Hannah, Michelle, and author Kristin Harmel about this book. And I encourage everybody to make a comment or ask a question in the comments on this Facebook Live, because you will be entered into a drawing to win a Skype or phone call with Kristin, the author, to talk even more about your own questions, or you can have a completely spoiler-filled discussion at that point. Okay, back to it. Michelle, you were going to chime in with something. What were you going to say?
Oh, we can't hear you.
Unmuting myself is something I have to remember to do. I was going to say, even with the nest, but a lot of the characters, you really kind of see the arc of their growth, which there were some characters I will say I was not a huge fan of, and Celine was one of them in the beginning. And in the end, I understood her, and I was like, okay, you're not so bad. I think that was one thing I really enjoyed about this book, is that there really is like an arc. And even if like you don't come around to the character, you kind of, you see why they are the way they are, and whether, then your opinion can change. And I thought that was really great about this.
We're getting a lot of questions about the translation of this into a screen version, and because these characters specifically are so real, who you think they would be. So Jean asked us, which actor do you think would play the role of Inez?
Oh, I am so bad at this. Abby, Michelle, Hannah, I would love your opinions about this too, because it's funny. It's a question I get asked all the time with all of my books, and you would think therefore I'd actually be prepared to answer such a question. But when I'm writing, I envision these as like actual people, and so it's as hard for me as you saying like who would play Kristin Harmel in a movie, and obviously it would be Reese Witherspoon. But aside from that, no, I'm just kidding. But I envision them really as real people, so it's hard for me to say which actors I think would play them. Do you guys have a thought? I mean, also I should say I have a 4-year-old, so unless it involves like Skye from Paw Patrol or like Peppa Pig, I'm really not familiar with anyone acting in anything these days.
Oh my god,
I am bad at remembering the physicalities that you draw for the authors in the book, but I feel like Inez could be like a Rachel McAdams kind of. I'm imagining someone a little, just a little sharp and foxy and smart, but also cute, and could kind of go either like, you could see her being kind of a little emotional and kind of quick to react, but also smart enough to kind of make the shifts she has to make later. I don't know. That's one that came to mind for me.
I definitely see that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I do too.
I do think of Julian in the present day, in Liv's story in the present day, for anyone who's read it. There's an attorney named Julian, and I describe him in the book as having Patrick Dempsey hair. And the whole time I saw him as Patrick Dempsey with a French accent. So yeah. So if we could just give a little shout out and invite Patrick Dempsey to come on over and be in our movie also, that would be great.
Monsieur McDreamy.
Yeah. Monsieur McDreamy. Yes.
Let's talk about the present day story for a little bit, because we mentioned, although I think of this and I pitch this often generally as a World War II story, one of the things that this book is about is how some of these choices from 60, 70 years ago have repercussions in the present. I guess I'll throw this to sort of Hannah and Michelle more than Kristin, because you probably like your whole book. What were some elements of that present day story that resonated for either of you guys?
So
go ahead.
When I said Inez was my favorite, Edith, I totally forgot, because by far she reminded me very much of my grandmother, where it was, you don't know anything. You have to follow blindly and just listen to what she says. She will show up to your house, make you go to a different tree, and that's it. No questions asked. Figure it out when it's time for you to. When I say it's time for you to figure it out. So she was probably my favorite. Sorry, I forgot about her. She was so mysterious and stubborn. And
if we're casting that, I'm like Helen Mirren.
Oh my god, yeah.
It's like, come on, off we go.
I could just imagine it. I could picture the scene.
I actually traveled with my grandmother, and so there were a couple times where I was reading and I was like, oh my gosh, it's so different, like the dynamic, I think, between the two characters that I have with my grandmother, but at the same time, that experience of like going someplace and knowing that there's some sort of history there, because I mean, we went to Ireland, and my grandmother is Irish, so it was that sort of connection, I think, kind of sat with me a little bit, and seeing how different, but also some of the relatable aspects there and how much it meant to me. I think that was something that I gleaned from it that meant a lot.
Yeah, I loved the experience. To fill in the viewership a little bit. Essentially, Grandma Edith, or Edith, if you're going to be French, comes, and her granddaughter Liv is in a rough patch in New York. And Edith just shows up on the doorstep one day and is like, why aren't you packed? And she's like, packed for what? And she's like, we're catching a plane to France, like in 3 hours. So chop, chop, but also make sure you make me a martini first. And I'm like, I will die for this woman. But I love the way their whole storyline as they get to France, and Edith has a secret to share with Liv, is also about the moment where you start seeing your parents or grandparents as real people, and understanding that they had like young lives behind them with all this drama that we don't know anything about. And I kind of loved that unpeeling of that onion as well. I think it all comes back to you have this incredible dramatic backdrop of history, but the people that Kristin's creating are so real and relatable and recognizable that it really brings the era to life in a way that history book doesn't do in the same fashion.
No, I agree. I think a lot of the time I forget that people had, they were young ones. They, all the stuff that they've been through. And I even just like for my grandma or Edith, they may be who they are now, but you don't often get to see what made them who they are now. And I thought that was like the pulling the back of the layers was really interesting to read.
Awesome. I'm imagining Grandma Edith peeling back the layers of a cocktail onion, by the way, like straight out of her martini.
Absolutely.
Also, I have to say, to sort of defend Grandma Edith a little bit, one of the questions I get often when I meet with book clubs or when I'm out on book tour for this book is, how realistic is that? She's a 99-year-old woman and she's kind of like trooping around like someone 30 years younger. And I always tell the story of a vigneron or a wine grower in the time of Dom Perignon back in the 1600s. So a very long time ago, back when people lived much shorter lifespans. He was in the Champagne region. He drank a glass of champagne every day and he lived to be 118. And he was sharp enough to get married at the age of 110. And doctors at the time studied him extensively because he lived to be so old. I mean, in the 1600s, to live to be 118. I mean, imagine that. And all of the doctors came to the consensus that it was the daily drinking of alcohol that did it for him. So he was effectively pickling his liver and it worked. And I think Grandma Edith has done the same.
Good. She's a wise woman.
We're getting a lot of love for Grandma Edith.
Yeah, I love it.
Everyone loves Grandma Edith.
Awesome. You know what? I want to, while Hannah's looking for more questions, and a reminder to everybody who's chiming in, ask a question or make a comment so you can be entered into the sweeps to win a call with Kristin. Kristin, I want to share a tiny bit of like the making of that maybe you can tell the audience about, because as you mentioned, you do a lot of research and sometimes stuff changes kind of late into the process. So we had edited this book and we were like, yep, this is great. We put it into production. It was typeset. And then there was a rather catastrophic event in the real world that kind of made its way into your book.
Yeah. So I had forgotten about that. There was a scene in the initial book. And in fact, the version that went out in galleys to reviewers and to people who read it early for Goodreads and things like that, where in the present day, Liv, who's Grandma Edith's granddaughter, and Julian, the lawyer she meets in France, where they are joking about Notre Dame de Reims, like the version of Notre Dame that is in the Champagne region. And they're talking about which one is bigger and grander, the one in Paris or the one in Reims. And it is a joke, and it's all very lighthearted, and they're sort of arguing about which Notre Dame is better. Which, thank goodness, we were able to change it, because how tone deaf would that have been after the awful tragedy at Notre Dame de Paris, where it burned, and who knows what's going to happen with its future. So Abby, you were kind enough to let me change that at sort of the 11th hour and 59 seconds. So we have a new scene where they're talking about Notre Dame in Reims, but it's not comparing it to Paris, and it's not sort of a jokey scene anymore. But yeah, thank goodness we were able to catch it.
Anna, you look expectant. Are we?
No, sorry. I saw 2 questions come through that are great. So I was like, oh, and then I didn't want to interrupt. So I cooled off for a second. But if you don't mind, I guess I can jump in and say, okay, so Sarah loved the book and wants to know what your next project is.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. What a great segue to what I wanted to talk about anyhow. Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. My next project, I'm like digging through my lap full of books here, is the Book of Lost Names, which will be out this summer, July 21st, I think. Also edited by Abby. Team Abby and Kristin, for together forever. We better be together forever, lady. But the Book of Lost Names is about a document forger during World War II. And it is also a story about the French resistance, but it tackles it in a completely different way. It's about books looted by the Nazis, sort of an ode to libraries and librarians and the importance of books to all of us, which I think is more important now than ever. But it's really a story, again, of an ordinary woman finding extraordinary strength within herself and finding a way to stand up against evil. And her way to stand up against evil is to forge documents such as, hang on, I can show you from my research.
You brought visual aids.
Yeah, my visual aids, exactly. So this is something that a document forger would have forged in France. As far as I know, this is a real one. But this is a travel permit issued by the Nazis in December of 1940 in Paris, allowing a French person to travel. So you couldn't travel without one of these. And there are all sorts of, I don't know if you can see it, but all sorts of official stamps. And it's printed on a certain type of paper with certain typeface and all sorts of things like that. And so people had to figure out how to forge documents like this in order to let people travel freely or travel under false papers. So the woman in the book learns how to do things like this. And I also have to show you, the book is called I dropped it. The book is called The Book of Lost Names because they record the names of children whose names they've had to change so that the children whose identity documents are being forged have some way of knowing who they are, or, at the end of the war. And so there's actually a book within the novel called The Book of Lost Names, which is just an old religious text from 1732 that they encode names in. And this, you guys, is actually the Book of Lost Names. It is an actual religious text from 1732. And as I was writing the book and doing the codes on the page, which are done using something called the Fibonacci sequence, I was actually using the real pages of the book to do the codes. So it is all very realistic. And oddly, the cover of the novel features a book that looks so much like this. Isn't that so similar? I mean, cool. and they never saw it. The people who designed the cover never saw this. So you guys, it was meant to be, I think.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Thank you for asking that question, Sarah. Yeah. Hannah, did you say you had a couple of questions?
I have one last one, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay.
And the last one I think is really relevant to what's happening right now and the fact that we're all kind of stuck at home. And that's Barbara wants to know what you're reading right now, if anything, and who your favorite authors are.
So I again, 4-year-old. My reading time is limited, but I did just finish a book that I'm blurbing. That's called The Seagate. I think it comes out sometime this fall from an author named Jane Johnson, which was very good. It was a World War II story told in a way that I'd never heard before. So whenever that book's coming out, I'll make sure to mention it on social media. It's really good, and I think it is coming from Simon & Schuster, if I'm not mistaken. But another book. We were talking before about World War II stories and how those are helpful during these times. But it's also nice to read something a little bit different from that. And one of the voices in fiction that I really, really like right now is a friend of mine named Mary Alice Monroe. And full disclaimer, she's also a gallery author, but that's not why I like her. That's not how I know her. It's not, what brings us together. But she has a book called The Summer Guests that came out several months ago in hardcover, but it actually came out today in paperback. And like me, she had to cancel her book tour. A lot of us have had to cancel our book tours. And so we've just been talking a little bit online about, how to reach out to readers. And she's trying to do a lot also to support local booksellers, which is also really important to me. But it's a great book, The Summer Guests, out in paperback today. And I've read it already, but it might be one that I just dive back into.
I think it's great to take an opportunity to have a little kind of remember to enjoy your beach reads, even if you don't have a beach inside right now. And you make such a great point, Kristin, about supporting your local bookseller and independent booksellers. Everybody out there, everything you're doing to help support your local bookseller, every great book you read is helping keep a business going. And Simon & Schuster is also working really hard in conjunction with bookshop.org, trying to support local bookselling and independent bookselling all over the place. And you can learn more about what S&S is doing at the link with this Facebook Live. We'll put that up. But think about, go ahead and order yourself. A lot of local bookstores are doing online ordering, or phone ordering, or sometimes curbside pickup, or even just getting a gift card that you'll spend later. Like, all of those things help, and they're going to keep the book business going, because I think what The Winemaker's Wife is about, and a lot of books are all about the importance of telling stories and sharing stories in difficult times. And so I think that's kind of a great way to wrap up this book club discussion. I love that we have managed to join and have this conversation and talk about a great book, even though we're all separated by our various sheltering in place. I'm so grateful to everybody who watched and asked a question. And just as a reminder, anyone who commented or asked a question, you're entered in the drawing to win a call or a Skype from Kristin herself to talk more about this great book. And let me just tell you all what's coming up next month, because if you're a book club addict and you want to do this again, it is going to be Jennifer Weiner's book, Mrs. Everything. I can't get enough of that cover, and she is terrific. Jennifer Weiner, I've been reading her stuff since Good in Bed and In Her Shoes. They're so good. And I feel like I've heard some amazing comments about Mrs. Everything. And if I am remembering rightly, she has a brand new book out or about to be out as well. Summer.
Good. Big Summer.
Big Summer. I'm like, it's blue. It's really cool cover.
Yeah.
So she's a great one to dip into if you haven't discovered her yet, or maybe you're coming back to her. Mrs. Everything is a wonderful opportunity. And it's also got a historical element to it, though a little different from World War II. And I'll leave that to you all for next month. But for now, Michelle and Hannah, and especially our author, Kristin Harmel, thank you all so much for joining us from Break to Studio 4. Thank you to Book Club favorites, and thank you to everyone out there. Keep reading and stay safe and healthy at home.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.